Is the world getting weirder or is it just me? I keep scrolling past deepfakes of babies having full-blown conversations and it just boggles the mind. So today I'm asking the question, is the world actually getting weirder or is it just our perception of the world? There's this kind of thing where every generation seems to think they live amongst the weirdest time or in the most progressive time. And it's a kind of observer bias. You are the observer, so you think that what you're observing has to be the most vivid or the most real. But genuinely, when we delve into it, how much truth is there to it? So that's what I'm going to try to do today. And ironically, it comes to you with the help of a little bit of AI, which in itself is a weird thing. 20 years ago, I couldn't have done that. It wasn't possible to have essentially a one-sided conversation and get decent input back. You'd have just been put in a mental asylum. But unfortunately, the criteria for that is a little bit higher these days. So I'm on the loose and exploring this topic. So let's go get into it. What's going on, beautiful people? This is the Perspective Chasers podcast, and I'm your host, John. On this episode, we are exploring the weird and the wonderful in the world. And I genuinely want to find out how weird the world is, because the potential for weirdness seems absolutely mind-boggling. But then the reality of it, they could be two very different things. So let's start with actually exploring why the world seems to be perceived as so weird. Like roughly 9 to 12% of US adults endorse widely kind of implausible conspiracy theories. Now that is going to be arguable because there are some conspiracy theories that I myself am like, is it really a conspiracy or is it just waiting for the full truth to come out until it's just a theory? But there's so many instances where one narrative is kind of perceived by X amount of the population and a whole nother narrative is perceived by the other. And instead of having a kind of mutual understanding of the other, they polarize it. And that in itself, I guess, starts to plant the seeds for that kind of weirdness, for that growth between, or that growth apart between two narratives or two understandings of the world. So it's not to say that every idea that is had that is a bit out there is a conspiracy one, but I think we tarnish each other as either conspiracy theorists or, is there an opposite to conspiracy theorist? Overly a normie? Whichever way you want to conceptualize it. But meanwhile, about 25% saw the truth of the idea of all of the COVID-19 stuff, which was some kind of not deliberate planning, but the narrative that was put out was far different to the actual truth. And while people were arguing a narrative that was closer to the truth that was actually perceived, there was a whole bunch of other people trying to argue the opposite. So again, all of these kind of, the kind of incoherencies amongst the information where one side says this and the other says that, and then you can't have two opposing truths in that sense. So even while that's being said, the longitudinal data is mixed. Like one analysis finds that there is a clear upward trend in conspiracy theories, but once you adjust the survey for wording and the sampling changes over decades, it doesn't really seem that there's much of change. In other words, it's kind of the headlines, again, perpetuating and exaggerating things. And once you ask yourself that question of like, why? Instantly, my mind goes, well, for profit, their own agenda, their own da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So straight away, you can see why there's so many narratives get contorted and pushed in different directions. And it really does make you think about how much of what you actually perceive is real. Again, a lot of what is in the news, is in social media, just in the world in general. A lot of what we are exposed to is somebody else's perception of the world, somebody else's idea of the world, or somebody else's kind of... See, I've kind of stopped myself there because, again, it's what they want you to perceive about them, if they're intentional. Like, there is such a mixed bag of people in the world. Some people are going to have the intention and they're going to be able to manipulate your understanding of the world or of themselves. And other people ain't. So trying to put everyone in the same bag, it just doesn't work. And again, it makes for a weird world, which in many senses is great. I love the world being weird and diverse and all of that. But then there's obviously the negative side of weird, which we may get into later or stumble on across against this. But like, let's get into the kind of bizarre side of things where you've got like 24/7 reporting of like sensationalized things that are just bizarre and whatever else in the media. Like, they've got that whole thing of if it bleeds, it leads, where it's like the more dramatic and more kind of gruesome something is, the more attention it's going to grab. I forget the actual term for it, but it's the same sense of when people are driving past a car accident. The thing that causes traffic isn't always the car accident. It's often people slowing down to look at the car accident. So we have this, I guess it's a negative bias where because something is negative or bad, it draws that extra attention and it sticks in our brain a little bit more. And there's probably an element of survival in that. Like, if we see somebody do something stupid that causes them to perish, then we're obviously like, okay, cool, remember that. Or if somebody eats a berry and it messes them up, or whatever it may be, if a negative thing happens, it's far more important for us to remember it because it's of a detriment, or it could be of a detriment to us in the future. Whereas if it serves as a positive, you've kind of got no urgency to it. Obviously, if something's detrimental, it serves a risk to your life or poses a risk to your life. So then to say that something is going to make your life better, but it's not necessarily going to make it worse, you've got a lot more time on the back end to figure that out. So the importance to remember it, at least to me, isn't there as much. I think that's why we kind of gravitate towards remembering or the negative side of things sticking in our brains so many more. But studies have shown that the digital narratives, the outlet uses like 50 to 100% more clickbait headlines than legacy media, skewing our sense of everyday normalcy. So if you think they've cranked up that dial 50 to 100% of what the kind of you didn't have clickbait back then, but just that kind of shock value of a title. So, I mean, a caveat to that would be some of the weird headlines might always have been there, only now they spread faster because the rate that we can actually click through things, so obviously the clickbait narrative, is far quicker. So you could only go through so many newspapers or so many documents throughout history or whatever else. The rate of input was far slower than it is now. Like the amount of input you can get at once, and as well the styles of input. Like before there was a lot more reading. Now if you're not kind of a reader, or you don't like to read, or you haven't got time to read, you can listen to audio, you can watch something, there's so many more ways in which we can actually absorb information. I think that's another area where it kind of taints the argument, where just the amount of stimuli that we have in that sense. Like again, there's small caveats all throughout this and all throughout life and history, but the amount in which a picture could be faked throughout history has never been more prevalent than it is now. So you used to be able to trust the kind of media that was in front of your eyes. If you had, for example, a private eye, a private investigator, I don't know why I didn't abbreviate the whole thing there. Anyway, a PI or a private investigator, and they took a picture of your spouse cheating back in the 1980s. That would be something that's far more solid. That's far more kind of evidence. Whereas nowadays, it's so easy for that image to be faked that it just kind of gets lost amongst the kind of chaos of life. The value of it just gets diminished so much. So then is that part of why they're cranking things up so much? Because they know that it is so easy for things to be faked that they have to heighten it to such a ridiculous degree that it actually grabs your attention. Like again, there's always going to be an agenda to be served here. So what is that when it's all said and done? Like, why are they cranking up the dial? Why does everything seem so weird? What benefit does it either serve to us or them? Because if somebody's not benefiting, then it's definitely redundant. But I can't swallow the pill that life is this weird and nobody's benefiting off of it. Like, somebody has to be benefiting off of the chaos. It's just, to me, it just makes no sense if nobody's benefiting off the chaos. Like, somebody has to be stirring the pot. And I'm not out here to point fingers as to who, but I'm just saying the pot's getting stirred. And if you can't see that, then you need glasses more than I do. And that is saying something. Trust me, my eyes are awful. But then, like, with that explosive rise of AI and deepfakes, like, there was 95,820 known deepfakes in 2023. A 550% rise since 2019. Like, obviously, you can argue the side that, obviously, a lot of the ones from 2023 could have gone under the radar or whatever else, but 550%? There's no way that much went under the radar. So you've still got a hundreds of percentile increase upon the amount of deep fakes that there are and everything else. Like, yes, our detection tools are better for it now, but there's definitely the ease of which you can make deep fakes and the amount that they're kind of out there is far more prevalent, at least to me. Like, I know if you'd have said to me a couple of years ago, John, can you make a deep fake? I'd have been like, I'll try, but it's gonna be a lot harder to create something convincing. Whereas nowadays, I'm fairly confident that I could create a convincing deepfake within a day or so. And my skills are definitely limited in that sense. If you're somebody that does this day in, day out, 100% you can create an image that completely fools, say, 98% of people. Like, there might be some people that work in that kind of similar industry or whatever else that can see certain things. They can see through that kind of uncanny valley. But I think the amount of people that you'll fool in general is so high. Like, there's so many people that would kind of drink the Kool-Aid in that sense. There's so many people, again, to tie it back to like conspiracy theories and all of that. There are people that believe conspiracy theories that most people could say, I can see that there is an air of truth in that, or I can see where the inspiration for that come from. But then there's going to be people that believe things that are just so completely out there that 99.999% of people be like, yeah, that's ridiculous, just off of a glance. But so many people are going to fall into that other, like, very small percentile. Like, if you're talking about there's 8 billion plus people in this planet, even if you're talking with a fraction of percent, that's still thousands of people. So, yeah, it's so easy. And then that thousands of people can be magnified and perpetuated and exaggerated through the media to seem like it's everybody. But it's really just not. It's just getting perpetuated and snowballed up through the kind of systems, and everybody along their way is trying to kind of cash in on the event, the thing, or whatever else. Like, kind of, we'll get into it, I think, in a minute, but I want to touch on the idea of, like, how the weirdness has always been prevalent in the world. Whether it be with, like, the kind of weird talent shows and all of that kind of stuff that we do now, or the idea of, like, Cirque du Soleil and kind of, what's the word? Just circus events and freak shows and all of that kind of weird side of life. We've always been fascinated with the out there. Whether it be literal, like, danger out there or just curiosity. We're drawn to the different. Like, I don't know whether that's part of evolution. I once had this thought that tall people and short people are attracted to each other because that's humanity trying to even themselves out. And it was a very kind of juvenile idea in its sense, although I do think there is somewhat of a relevance to it. Like, obviously, and again, I'm going to lean to the stigma that men will be on the taller side in a heterosexual relationship and women on the shorter side. It's a far more normal kind of relationship when you're looking at the kind of protector-provider side of things and da-da-da-da-da. But I think that's kind of humanity trying to even itself out in a way. And then when you look into kind of genetics and the evolutionary side of things, there's a part of life which tries to constantly diversify itself. So when you see a drastic difference in genome, whether it be something like race or ethnicity or just different characteristics, could simply be in hairstyle, like curly averse to straight, or blonde against brunette, or blackhead, or whatever you want to look at. Like, when you look at that difference or that diversity, I think there is a genetic predisposition to wanting to diversify your genome. And I think that's kind of ingrained in humanity, where throughout the kind of civilization and throughout time, people mix, and the more mixing kind of creates a better species in a sense. Again, you've got that whole thing of like inbreeding goes nowhere, and to kind of keep it somewhat talkable, look at like the idea of pedigree animals or pedigree dogs. So a lot of pedigree dogs are kind of kept pedigree by a lot of problems, and like, my mum loved Labradors. And because she always had golden labs, you always see they had the same problems. Their kidneys would go, their legs would go. And every time you ended up taking them to the vets, they'd say, yeah, it's the problem with them being pedigree and this, that, and everything else. But for somebody that gets a pedigree dog, you think the pedigree says that they're better, and them being purebred is a better thing. But for something to be pure means that it's just recycled and recycled and recycled in that sense. And for a genome, that needs diversification, because the world varies in so many instances. So I think there's part of us that is attracted to that weird. It's attracted to that different, simply from a genetic point of view. And I know that was probably a long-winded way of saying it, but I don't know why else we'd be so drawn into the weird. And again, it's not to say that every weird is bad. Sometimes weird is amazing. But it's to say that there is something different about it that draws our attention, and it makes us talk about it so much more than something normal. Like, again, you see it every time in these clips of like when, say, somebody really tall goes to somewhere that their population has a lower average height. Say you got somebody that's 6'8", 7 foot in China or something like that. They stand out like a sore thumb. So the attention that they get is just ridiculous. And it's not to say that there is anything wrong with that person that is 6'8" or whatever else. Elsewhere in the world, they fit in a lot more. But simply where they are, because they're so different, it draws so much attention, and that person would get talked about by everyone for X amount of reasons, or this, that, or wherever else. And that will just carry through. And I wonder how much of that is just kind of perpetuated and snowballed for various reasons through society, through media, through just the population, and what effect that has on us. Like, the more you think the world is weird, the more we question ourselves, no? We ask ourselves if we're weird and if that's right or if that's wrong, or da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Like, it snowballs in so many ways, but I guess I'm snowballing there. So let's try to draw it back into asking the question kind of against, like, what's actually improving and what's actually normal about the world. Like, I guess to say things are getting better would be not a lie. It's definitely a truth in a sense. Like, since 1990, the share of living allowance in terms of like how much you earn has gone up. It's fell from, I've butchered this. One sec. I'm trying to read a stat, and it's, the way it's worded is messed up and it is messing up my head. But we will get there, so give me one moment. Extreme poverty is plummeting. So they say. Actually, I don't understand. We'll get to that on the caveat. Since 1990, the share living on $2.15 a day fell from 38% to 8.5% by 2024, lifting over 1 billion people out of dire poverty over the world, in a sense. But see, that's why I had such a problem reading that stat, right? Because the amount of people living on $2.17 a day is a weird way of framing it in a sense. To me, from that, I understand that for $2.17 a day, you're getting your rent, your electric, your utility, like all your utilities, your car stuff, your housing, your food, like all of that. I don't know how much it would cost to live day to day in that sense here, and I'm not sure if this stat is encompassing that. But again, this is where a kind of problem comes with the stats. So it's about how they're measured and the questions that are asked and this, that, and everything else. So I do think overall life has kind of got better since the 90s, but at the same time, other dials have been cranked up to where there are far more people working like two-parent households these days where they're both working, or people are just struggling, or people are working two jobs, or people are retiring later and just finding general life harder in a sense. So to say that overall, I mean, again, that's where the kind of extreme part has to be focused on, because, yeah, if you're talking about the absolute extremes, the amount of people that are starving, it's probably a true statistic that things are improving. But again, that's why it feels so weird, because things are improving while so many people are still complaining that things are so bad, because the wrong dials seem to be cranked up. Like, to scrutinize this more, like the pandemic and conflicts cause temporary setbacks, but the long-term trajectory remains sharply downward in the terms of poverty. But again, it's the type of poverty that is lived. Like, most people are eating heavily processed foods. The stuff that they're getting there is not nutrient dense, and most people, they're suffering because of it for X amount of health reasons, and there's so many ways in which life is impacted and things cascade through your life. So if the things that you're putting in your body are of a poor quality in terms of nutrition, education, information in a general, just life mentality or life ethos, the end result is obviously going to get tainted and toxified and just ruined, at least in my eyes. So to kind of sit there and say that, like, yeah, extreme poverty is down, the world's getting better, it might be on the face of it true that extreme poverty is down. But I think the level of overall poverty has changed, and the way that people are suffering is different. And it's like the idea of people that, I don't know if this is a true stat, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the amount of people that are having negative health consequences due to overweight or opposed to being underweight is actually higher now. So there are more people experiencing negative health effects because of being overweight or what's the word? Because of just poor nutrition and just being morbidly obese, or just having detrimental effects from, let's just say, eating related or food related health problems. Because there are so many things that are wrong with our food system right now, and it's affecting people drastically across the board, and none of us, or it seems like nobody has the time to figure that out or see that. So again, it creates this kind of disparaged and misunderstanding in the world. But then you've got things like the global homicide rate has fallen. So that is a massive positive, obviously. Like, in a world where everybody's going population this, population that, to hear that the population has less homicides amongst it is great. But again, that rings weird to the ear in a time of mass wars and this, that, and everything else going around. So the UN's international homicide rate dropped from 7.5%, 100,000 people in 2000, to 6.1 in 2021. And to kind of scrutinize that, the media focuses on shootings and high-profile crimes that masks the kind of broader, steady decline of this. And like I said at the beginning of that point, there's a lot of wars going on, and obviously in a time of war, you're going to focus on those things. But then you've got this kind of disparage between the peaceful places seem to be more peaceful, or they're perceived to be more peaceful, and the kind of horrific places seem to be more horrific. But then how much of that is exaggerated on both sides of it? Like, how much is the peace of a place exaggerated and then the horror of a place exaggerated? For various reasons, and kind of, I guess both would have their benefits and their downsides depending on where you're looking at it from. But again, it's so many people don't have the time to get all of the information and to have a kind of well-informed idea of things in that sense. Like, even if you look at across like politics, life, health, this, that, and everything else, all of the various sides of life, to keep current on things, you would be, I mean, at least to me, it seems overwhelming. Maybe that's because I'm so far away from it that to kind of just top up everything, like that idea of the amount that you'd have to, the amount of ground you'd have to gain in order to kind of catch up seems so overwhelming. But once you are caught up, it's not as overwhelming, or it's not as much of a monumental task. So you would essentially just be topping up topping up the cups in that sense. It reminds me of a story from like rehab therapy in that, where like the amount of rehab you would do around the early stages of recovery and when you've kind of just started that journey is going to be the majority of your day and your life. But throughout the recovery process, that's going to teeter down, and eventually it's going to get to a stage where the recovery is a very small portion of your life, but it allowed all that massive journey allowed you to get back and catch up to where you would have been, or even go further than that. So there's so many ideas that kind of come out of how things are perceived in that way, and how different stats are projected and dissected. Like, the more you kind of look around the world and look at different parts of the world, you'll see the stats vary drastically in terms of kind of the way the world is. It's going to vary everywhere. So to have a stat that is true across the world, it's gonna vary so much. There's many nations are growing more peaceful in that sense. Like, so when we're talking about like across the world, it seems like many places are getting more peaceful. But then again, I question how much of that is because our tolerance for what peace is kind of like we're kind of accepting things a lot more. Where it's like I'm gonna struggle to find a decent way to frame it. But like, if you get away with I suppose it ties into that idea of if you give somebody an inch, they'll take a mile. If you give somebody that little bit of sway, they'll take more and more. And in life, if you kind of give that sway to your idea of what's weird or what's acceptable, every so often it just gets pushed and pushed and pushed. And eventually your line for what is out there is way out there. And I don't know if that's part of what's happening with us. In like, if you'd have gone down the road 20, 30 years ago and seen somebody dressed up in a ridiculous costume or in just a completely out there way, like I'm struggling to find a decent way to preface it, but you would know it if you saw it. Just a way that makes you, if you see somebody dressed in a way that just makes you stop and just like, what the hell are you doing with your life and yourself and blah, 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 blah. Like, I think our tolerance for that has just been nudged up so gradually over the years that we kind of think that places are more peaceful when really and truly there is a lot. If we would hold it to the kind of criteria of decades ago, we would be off the scale now. So there is so much idea of like how the kind of idea of peace shifts over time, how it's measured and how we define it to ourselves. Like, throughout generations, peace is going to be defined differently, and their understanding of peace is going to be defined differently. So then I guess to end the kind of argument against the world is weird, let's end with the kind of institutional trust is recovering. After COVID-19 era, though trust in medical and scientific institutions rebounded to pre-pandemic levels for many demographic groups, there's still an air of where things are rebounding. So like, to me, there was an air of distrust before, and there will always be an air of distrust after. And that air of distrust is valid. Like, you should always question science. You should question everything in a sense. Because if it can't hold up to that scrutiny, if it can't hold up to that questioning, then it's worth maybe dropping. So if our medical industries and our medical understanding can't hold up to a bit of scrutiny and a bit of kind of, hey, you did this or you did that or we failed here and da-da-da-da, maybe we need to start to look at the book again and ask ourselves a bit of a deeper question and kind of go things a bit harder. Again, are we becoming more complacent across life in this sense? Are we saying like, well, it didn't affect me, so yeah, let's forget about it? But then how much of this stuff does affect us in one way or another? You may not see it in today or tomorrow, but in 6 months or 6 years or maybe further down the line, you will see the cascading effect of this. So maybe it is important to take a look at it now and have that understanding of things now and understand, what are we listening to? What are we being told? And is there truth to it? And should it be scrutinized? Like, there was something before, as always, the idea of a jester. If you couldn't make fun of the king and everything around, there had to be a way that you could laugh at yourself. Because if you couldn't take yourself as in a light-hearted sense, you was kind of sick with power. And everybody needs that light-hearted tone where you can laugh at yourself. Whether you're a king, queen, or whatever you may be, you need to be able to laugh at yourself in that sense, because it shows that you don't take yourself too seriously. So then, I know the kind of science and health is a serious topic, but if you can't scrutinize it and if they can't take a bit of poking and a bit of jabbing, then maybe we really need to ask ourselves, are those systems serving us in their best way? But trust remains across uneven party lines. Like, there's always going to be issues, and there's always going to be things where like surveys have their biases and da-da-da-da-da. But I think overall in the long term, we need to kind of stay on that idea of question everything. I think it's always going to serve you far better to question things than not. Look, you might question something and get a simple answer and be told that was a stupid question. Fair play. At least you got the answer. At least you've done your due diligence in that sense. And I think that's always going to serve us best. So I guess we'll summarize why the world feels so amplified and kind of maybe, I don't know. We'll see where my mind goes with this, but yeah. So the availability of heuristics, which is like just that hands-on experience in the world, the kind of vivid, bizarre stories that lodge in your memory, them things are going to hold far more to that narrative than the kind of mundane days. Like, it's far more prevalent in your mind, the kind of negative things that happen, than the good things. It's so easy for us to take the good things for granted that it's easy to just be overwhelmed with that negative. So when you're kind of living with those hands-on experiences and kind of going through your day-to-day, understand that it's going to be a lot easier to remember those negative things. So at least to me, I'd say try not to focus on them so much and try to take them all with a pinch of salt. Again, a lot of this is going to be exaggerated to get clicks, to get views, to get likes, to get engagement. So take it with a hefty pinch of salt. Like, the algorithm loves that kind of shock value, the idea of kind of magnifying the outrage, and it just kind of feeds into the world is weird. And people benefit off of that. People profit off that. So, again, your attention is somebody else's profit margin. So understand that, whether it be the things that you choose to buy or the things that you choose to watch or the things that you choose to do with your time, your attention is benefiting somebody else. So the more that they can hold your attention, the more that they can gravitate to that and build that into their narrative, the better that is. So ask yourself, what is somebody else getting from that headline? Because it will start to really kind of build a narrative of your own, where you're like, okay, I can see what they want me to think. What do I want to think about this? And that might kind of, what's the word? Damn it. That might encourage you to do your own research and do a little bit more due diligence on the subject. And then you've got the idea of like historical amnesia. Like I said earlier, past eras they had their freak shows, they had kind of fewer cameras than TikTok. So although they had the freak shows and the Cirque du Soleils and all of the other aspects, they didn't have a way to have it encapsulated and kind of perpetuated so fast through media. Whereas nowadays, there's so much weird stuff on the internet, and everybody's kind of weird aspects are there to be pushed out to the world. So it's just at your fingertips so much more. So is it that it's in the world more, or that it's just more available in the world? I don't know. And I don't know if we'll ever know. Like, every generation is going to have their biases. But, nah. I don't know. Every generation is going to have their biases, but is it fair? Is it valid? I don't know. Like, this is, again, it's going to go back to the old idea of my kaleidoscope of life, where it's just a snake eating its tail, and it just goes around and goes around. Like, every generation is going to feel that they are the best, they are the worst, they are the weirdest, they are the most wonderful, they are the most progressive. Like, unless there is a stark kind of stark evidence against the fact. But even then, I think they'll find ideas to argue that they're doing better. Like, it's still, I guess I'll use this point to end this out. It still baffles me how we don't understand so many of these megalithic structures around the world, yet we're so quick to say that we are far more intelligent than any kind of civilization to become before us. But if that is true, we should understand their technology. We should understand how they did it, but we don't. So at some point, it has to be true that there were smarter people than us. But that seems to be such a bitter pill to swallow that we just can't do it. And because we can't do it, we find ways to argue and beat around the bush and and try to say, no, we are superior, we are the most intelligent, we are the most advanced we've ever been, and this, that, and everything else. But there is literally monumental evidence to say that is false. So really and truly, can you trust what is out there in the world? I don't know. Like, to me, it always has to come back down to your personal experience. Trust in what you experience, in what you go through, and what you see. In a time of deep AI fakes and all of the other nonsense, it's the best advice I can give you from this episode, I guess. But yeah, I think that's going to call it for this one. That's been actually quite fun, and hopefully it's had a little bit more structure than usual episodes. And if that's more of kind of what you like, let me know in the comments, because again, it's hard to exist in a vacuum. We need that feedback loop. So if you want more from me, in that sense, if you want more substance, I need to know that it's not in a vacuum. So thank you for subscribing if you are subscribed. Thank you for liking the videos if you do, and all of that good stuff. It's always going to help immeasurably. But as well, let me know your thoughts on the world. This pod is all about perspective and how the world is perceived by all of us, and trying to build up that collective narrative. So let's do that. Let's engage with one another and talk about our experiences, because then we can kind of find a new medium in that sense, a new idea of what actually is weird and what is normal, and deepen our own understanding of the world. But I better come up with a seed from all of this gobbledygook, because it's not the point, but I mean, it's always the kind of thing that I like to end with, and hey, it's a bit of me, I guess. But all of this just makes me think about, you can't trust what you always see. So, like, you can't always trust your senses. So I guess that is the seed from this episode, is don't ever trust one source, whether it be your senses or the media. Do due diligence, do things far deeper than that. Just because something looks good or tastes good doesn't mean it's good for you. Just because something sounds good doesn't mean it's true. Just because something makes you feel good or fits your narrative doesn't mean it's true or right. So do the due diligence. Do the backstopping in life. I think you're worth that. I think we all are. Like, we're worth figuring this stuff out and not just perpetuating stuff that gets clicks and gets kind of attention in the short term, but genuinely deep diving and understanding things from on a deeper level, and kind of to a better end. Not just understanding something in a shallow kind of surface level, but actually understanding the ins and outs of something. Not just why we do things, but understanding all of the motivations behind it. Are there biases? Are there things that kind of taint our understanding of the idea? But essentially, ask more questions. I don't think that's ever going to do you a disservice in the long term. But I think that's it for this episode. So all the best, and I'll catch you on the next one.